The year was 1976. America was celebrating the bicentennial, its 200th birthday. It was a months-long affair that featured different kinds of events around the country. In New York, a parade of dozens of historic ships sailed from New York Harbor up the Hudson River. At the National Mall in D.C., the National Air and Space Museum held its grand opening on July 1st, 1976, timed to correspond with the bicentennial celebrations at the Capitol. Some of the most elaborate and highest-profile celebrations took place in Philadelphia, the birthplace of the nation, where the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration of Independence. In the week leading up to July 4th, 1976, the city hosted what it called Freedom Week, which featured street fairs, concerts, and other events. An estimated 2 million people visited the city during that time, including Queen Elizabeth, who took a trip to Independence Hall and gifted the country with the bicentennial bell, which was forged at the same place as the original Liberty Bell. Now, you'd hardly know it from those photos, but 1976 was an uneasy time in the United States. Richard Nixon had resigned in disgrace less than 2 years before. The country was still dealing with the political turmoil that was left behind by the Watergate scandal. And just a year prior to the bicentennial, the world witnessed the fall of Saigon. The country was experiencing an energy crisis triggered by conflicts in the Middle East. But every 50 years since its founding, America has made a big deal of celebrating its anniversary. It's supposed to be a time for the country to reflect on its history and on its values, but it's also been used to push a narrative about national pride and unity that rings false for many people, especially those groups who have been historically oppressed. At the same time that people were celebrating the bicentennial in downtown Philadelphia on the 4th of July, 1976, there were counter rallies at the northern end of the city, attended by more than 30,000 people. Many of those counter-protesters were Black Americans, Native Americans, and women's rights activists. There was a large coalition of Puerto Ricans calling for the island's independence from the United States. At the time, Philadelphia was run by Frank Rizzo, the highly polarizing mayor who previously served as the city's police commissioner. He's been called the most notorious cop in Philadelphia history, accused of leading a police force that was known for its brutality and for targeting minority groups. He held a special animus against the Black Panthers, whom he once said, quote, should be strung up. Just 50 years earlier, in 1926, Black Philadelphians found themselves sidelined by organizers preparing for the country's 150th anniversary. They protested along with the Jewish and Catholic communities when word got out that organizers were going to let the Ku Klux Klan hold a Klanvocation. That's what they called it, as part of their events. The protests worked, by the way. The Klanvocation was canceled. Nevertheless, later that year, the KKK, an ascendant group at the time of the country's 150th anniversary, held its own parade in our nation's capital. Anniversaries are imperfect records of the thing which is being celebrated. In America's case, anniversaries often gloss over the racial dynamics underlying much of America's history and politics, issues that remain unsolved because America has never actually fully reckoned with its racist past and its original founding sin of slavery. In 1 month, America will mark the 250th anniversary of its founding. Like previous anniversaries, there is a deep unease about this. I feel a deep unease about these celebrations to which I am invited to mark the 250th anniversary of our so-called democracy. Because this 250th anniversary is taking place during yet another period of deep and fundamental and existential unrest in this country, brought on by the country's unresolved racial politics. That's what this is. Women and Black Americans have seen their rights taken away. The Voting Rights Act has effectively been gutted. A number of states are continuing to gerrymander their congressional maps ahead of the midterm elections, with the explicit effect of taking away political power from Black Americans. Louisiana did exactly that. Just a few days ago, it passed a new map that eliminated Black majority districts. If you've got conflicting feelings about America's upcoming anniversary, like you want to celebrate the ideals that America strives for, which are noble and should be celebrated, but lament the state of the country, you're not alone. At least I'm with you on this. Someone else is too. In his new book, America USA, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries, Eddie Glaude Jr. argues that his double consciousness might be inherent in all Americans. He writes, quote, Americans' double consciousness is the consequence of a nation that defines itself with the foundational principle of the equality of men and yet holds others as chattel or resigns them to second-class status. The principle and the practice cannot coexist without contradictions, and to hold them together as if they can is a form of madness. It is a split that comes with the American promise and contempt for that promise, warring ideals from the beginning that have threatened and continue to threaten to tear the nation apart, end quote. These are meaningful words. Joining me now to talk about his book is Eddie Glaude Jr., Distinguished Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. He's the author of the Substack column A Native Son and author of the newly published book America, USA, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries, which came out on Tuesday. It is not a part of our Velshi Band Book Club, but I think after 166 meetings of the Velshi Book Club, I should remind people it was born with you. You and I had the first conversation about this. Some people are going to want to ban you for the very first paragraph in your book, so I'd like to read this. It says, it is entitled, the introduction is entitled, Bitterness at the Bottom of the Cup. I do not love America and never have, especially now. It seems to me misplaced or dangerous to love something so abstract and so morally dubious. And then you go on to say, love is most often felt and experienced close to the ground in the life lived in a particular place and time and in memories that take up residence in the heart. I suspect love of country is shorthand for the heartfelt relationships and experience that make us who we are, things that happen in the place we call home, no matter how complicated that place may be.
Yeah.
Eddie, I feel like you wrote this book to have a conversation today. I am not meeting Americans who are who take the fact that we should just be celebrating 250 years of victory. I'm meeting Americans who are very scared about where we are today.
Absolutely. We're feeling that the world that made our lives possible, the country that made our lives possible, is collapsing all around us. And in this 250th year, you have people who are trying to hijack the idea of America, Alec, for their own ideological ends. I feel that white nationalists have seized control over the federal government. And they're trying to put forward, they've made their choice. The double consciousness that you talked about at the beginning, that America imagines itself as a beacon of freedom and as a white republic. Donald Trump and his MAGA folk have made a choice. We are a white republic. And they just simply want the rest of us to play our minor bit parts and to show gratitude and to shut up. And so I wanted to begin there because I'm from Mississippi. And I remember my dad was the second African-American hired at the post office in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And he moved us from one side of town in Moss Point to the other. And I was playing with my Tonka truck outside with my new friend. And his dad came outside and he said, stop playing with that N-word.
Wow.
And I had to grab my truck and go inside. So the world told me the country told me what it believed about me. And then I went inside and my parents put a crown above my head and told me not to believe it. So I had to, how could I love something that wounded me? I had to learn how to survive it. And my parents equipped me with that.
1965, Voting Rights Act. We've talked a lot in the last several months about the desecration of the Voting Rights Act. But it was an important year for another reason. And I want you to tell us about this. It was the year first of all, it was the first year in which we really were a democracy. But more than that, it was the first year in which we realized immigration and what it was. And it was the first time America became that nation of immigrants that we were going to be. But tell me about the importance of this.
Two important pieces of legislation, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, the Hart-Celler Act. The Hart-Celler Act aimed to overturn the Johnson-Reed Immigration and Nationality Act of 1924, which established national origin quotas and the like. Now, Representative Johnson was from Washington. He was a member of the Klan. Senator Reed was from Pennsylvania, 250,000 members of the Klan, or of his state. The Klan celebrated the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act as the pinnacle of its vision of the country. Because remember, 1920s, this isn't just simply the age of jazz and the age of Charleston. This is the age of the Klan. They even claimed responsibility for electing Calvin Coolidge. So what you see in this moment right now, because history haunts, it echoes, it rhymes, is it also all-out assault on two pieces of legislation that fundamentally shifted the direction of the country, ushering in a multiracial democracy. So we can't think of immigration in Delaney Hall over here and the assault and disenfranchisement of black folk over there. It's all one and the same.
Yes. By the way, as I was showing our viewers about what happened last night at Delaney Hall, you were on air. while this was happening. Tell me about this, because these detention centers and these protests outside of them and the interactions with police, they feel abstract to probably most Americans because you don't live around them, you don't see them. Tell me what you just said there, that these are not separate things. You cannot watch how we are thinking. And I don't really care what you think about immigration. What you think about immigration policy is very different from the dehumanization that we watched last night, with which you are very familiar.
Yeah, this is an all-out assault on our democracy. It's an all-out assault on a conception or an idea of democracy that is deeply enriched by the diversity of this nation. And so we're going to focus on the spectacle of protest, and we're going to lose sight of the black site these detention centers, all of this violence that's being done in our name. And instead, we need to understand fundamentally that you have people who assume that this country must be and must remain a white nation. And they will do anything, even destroy the basic foundations of democracy to make it so. And that's an echo of history.
Yeah.
There's just really quickly, Ali, there's a piece written in 1926 by Hiram Wesley Evans, the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, published in North American Review. And what he does, he lays out all of the challenges around immigration, particularly from that part of Europe that they didn't like. The language he uses is exactly the language of today. Exactly. History might not repeat itself, but it damn sure rhymes. This is Mark Twain. So we're in a moment where we're dealing with the haunting consequences of a choice that we've never made.
And that's why it involves all of us. Eddie, thank you for the book. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your support, particularly on this show. It's been 6 years of support, and it's been several years of the Velshi Man Book Club, and it was your and my discussion on the phone that led to the formation of this, and it has become such an important part of that fight for democracy, because when they ban your books, they come for everything.
Well, the 11 o'clock hour will be blessed now.
And well, hopefully you'll bless us with your company there as well. Eddie Glaude is a distinguished professor of African-American studies at Princeton University. He's the author of the brand new and important book, America, USA, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries.